With over 100 years of collective expertise, our unique partnership combining consultation, capture, and creativity provides you with the perfect end-to-end solution to bring your collection to life, faster, more efficiently, and at a lower cost than you might expect. Let's take a closer look. Digitising your collection has three main benefits. It provides a detailed record to support your preservation and conservation missions and allows better access for research. It means increased routes of access for your visitor, interacting with collections on-site or online, getting closer to the stories they have to tell. It's not replacement, it's engagement. And it's not just enhancing your current collection that is already on display. Imagine unlocking the potential digital engagement of those items that normally take up too much space, or are just too delicate or priceless to have out on display. Finally, it is also an investment for the future. From new technology opportunities to 3D printed replicas, you have a flexible resource for new revenue streams and creative collaborations. Our new technology, the Arago system, is self-contained, portable, and robotic, meaning your collection never even needs to leave your site. Handling is minimized, and the whole process is much faster than traditional methods, doing in 30 minutes what used to take days. Making a pin-sharp, three-dimensional photographic record of an object is not a replacement for the real thing. It simply allows you and your visitors to get closer, in ways that would otherwise be impractical or impossible. So whether it's caring for your collections, engaging your visitors, or investing in your sustainability, there's never been a better time to get closer.
Fantastic to see you all. Thank you very much for attending the webinar. I think just to give you a bit of context of where this came from, because it's all quite a new venture and a new partnership, and that drove the need for the webinar essentially. So yeah, we've got a partnership here of three companies, and I'm representing ATS. And we'll give you a little background on where that came from. Then we'll give you little intros on each of us and where that partnership came from. So Museums and Heritage Show. So in the UK, that's probably our largest exhibition and conference that happens. It's a 2-day event. Happens in the summer, around May time. And last year we had people come to the stand and we were chatting about 3D digitization of teapots, would you believe? So we got chatting, and actually we didn't do any 3D scanning as ATS. So I got chatting to Martin across the way. He had a stand opposite with Jeff, and we got chatting about what 3D digitization could look like with these teapots and moving on. Post M&H show, we then got together and started having a look at the technologies around, because 3D photogrammetry was new to us, but Jeff and Martin knew a lot about it. And eventually we pulled together a partnership. And we all have three independent roles within this, and that essentially allowed us to go back to this client who'd started exploring 3D digitization, and this kind of born this concept and this new service. So I'll let people intro each side of it. So essentially we've got three elements. We've got the consultation, the capture, and the creation of 3D content. And if you wouldn't mind giving us an intro as the consult partner, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. So I'm Martin, and I am part of Digitization.io, the sort of consultancy side of this venture, I guess. And Digitization.io is the service that we provide is really consultancy, expertise in digitization, particularly of cultural heritage, but other sectors too. It was founded by Jeff Laycock about 12 years ago. I came on board about 18 months ago, 2 years ago nearly. My previous history is as head of digital at the Postal Museum. Jeff has been working in digitization for nearly 30 years in various guises, commercial as well as sort of academic as well. And we provide lots of information about digitization, about the kinds of digitization that museums, archives, libraries can do. And as part of that, photogrammetry and 3D object digitization was something that we were noticing more and more people asking about. So when the opportunity came at the Museum and Heritage Show to have a conversation with ATS and with Genus, whom we know quite well from previous sort of contact, the question boiling us together, pulling us together was how do we provide this? How do people actually get hold of 3D services and then make good stuff, entertaining, engaging stuff out of it? So that's kind of where we come in. I'll hand over to Paul.
Thank you very much, Martin, and also Spencer as well for introducing everybody. I'm Paul Negus. I'm from Genus. I'm the managing director here. As I say, we go back a long way. We're the capture element of this whole trio partnership. We started in 1974, for those who don't know us. We're a 100% family-owned company. We have 49 staff based in Nuneaton in Warwickshire. We're a microfilm company, is our history. My father's side of the company, we've been involved in microfilm consumables and equipment for all that time. And we still are, and it's still a very big part of our business. And we're the Fuji reseller for the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so we sell to 60 countries worldwide microfilm. But in the last 20 years, we focus more on digitization. That's both the heritage equipment side of things, and also our own digitization studios as well. We have 4 studios here in Warwickshire. And we sell all the equipment associated with book and document scanning and capture, photographic as well. And we have 5 service engineers who support all that equipment in the field as well. So we have a broad reach in terms of heritage capture. And it was the Museum and Heritage Show, as Spencer said, last year, where this idea came together of looking into our niche areas of products that we capture. And 3D came along, and we actually own the Arago unit that we'll be talking about today. It's based in our studio in Nuneaton. We have 5 team members who've been trained up on the actual capture process, and also all the post-processing as well, including reality capture and Blender to create those the wonderful images that we're going to be sharing with you very soon. And more importantly, we have the van that takes the Arago around the country on its adventures to capture things in 3D format. So basically, that's us. That's a little bit of introduction to us, and I'll let the other guys sort of carry on with the detail of the presentation. I'll play back to you later.
Cheers, Paul. That's great. So I'm Spencer Clark, and I'm the managing director at ATS. We've been around, it's our 30th birthday next year, actually. So from our founding, very much about visitor experience, interpretation and storytelling, and using the appropriate technologies for that. We were grounded in, I guess, on-site experiences, so audio, multimedia devices, but we do all the full content creation. So from audio, film, animation, apps, digital, web, we've got an in-house team who create all of those amazing tools to tell the stories. And that's kind of where our partnership, where we fit in with this, is once we've got those wonderful objects, is how do we tell those stories a bit better in creative and original ways. So that's where we sit with the creative party at the end, who take all the hard work that Paul and Martin, the team, have done, and put it into presentation mode. So I think the majority of this talk is going to be very much around the process. It is a new innovative process, new equipment that has lots of benefits that we'll cover over. So this is very different to the manual approach, and Martin will get into that. So new venture, we're going to ask, there's a poll with just 3 very simple questions later on. It'd be great to just, if you could feedback on those for us. Also during the live chat, feel free to post some questions. I know many of you put some questions to us before this, so we've prepared to make sure we cover those answers off. But if things pop up during the chat, put it into the chat. Karina's in the background, faceless, the ATS logo, but she'll be bringing the questions together, and we can see if there's any that we haven't answered. And obviously there's an opportunity post this, we'll come back with FAQs and various things. So with further ado, let's get over to Martin, who's going to explain a little bit more about 3D capture.
That's great. Thank you, Spencer. I hope you can all hear me. Let me know if you're not. Great. Thanks, Spencer. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is just do a little screen share. go. Presumably you can all see that. So what I'm going to do is talk you through, first of all, 3D, why 3D, and what we see in the sector, the cultural sector specifically, the burgeoning interest in 3D. Then I'm going to talk you through how we produce 3D models of objects, and that's the service that we might be able to bring to you. So first of all, 3D. I mean, we all have an experience of 3D, whether it's watching cheesy 1950s films or or even Avatar in more recently. We all have this sense of 3D as being present, but a little bit cheesy. The metaverse, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are trying to sort of populate our lives with an alternative reality, VR reality, and it's a little bit cheesy. But park that cheesiness for a moment and think about 3D in a wider context. And actually, there are a lot of consumers of 3D content. Specifically the video game industry. If you think about 3D gaming like Minecraft or Fortnite, they have huge amounts of monthly visitors, 270 I think for Fortnite every month, and they generate billions in revenue. And if you look at this slide here, this is for the UK. This is the amount of percentage of population in the UK that is currently gaming, and not all of this is Wordle or Candy Crush. A lot of this is 3D environments, things like Assassin's Creed, things like Fortnite, Pokemon Go. Everybody remembers Pokemon Go from a few years back on their phones. It still has a huge presence. It has 270 million active users a month. So it's not just a niche interest. It's something that a lot of us are doing, and actually that bears out. This is recent findings from the Audience Agency when they did their digital hybridity report last year. They asked audiences whether they'd be willing to pay for digitally enhanced in-person events. This isn't things that they do on their home computers, at home. This is something that they do within a gallery space, within an experience. And as you can see from the graph, the younger audiences there, actually, they're willing to pay for digital experiences. And that doesn't just mean 3D, it means a whole, panoply of things. But 3D content and 3D experiences are certainly part and parcel of that. So we like to think that there's an audience for this. We think that cultural venues can grow 3D content and put it in the mix of their engagement. And Spencer's going to talk a lot about that later on. But how do you get 3D content? You've all got rich collections of objects, fragile, expensive, priceless. Sometimes they're not so expensive, not so priceless, but they're things that you have physically. How do you make them digital? How do you turn them into 3D? There's different methods. So these are some of the methods that can be used. It's not all of them, but the one on the bottom left is structured light. In fact, actually structured light at the top right, two different types of that. And what that is a device with two sensors on it that then projects light patterns on an object and then records the deformations of those patterns as it passes over the object. And from that, it records a point in space. Bottom right, there is the LiDAR. This is done more for environmental scanning of locations rather than objects. And it points an invisible laser beam at a target and generates a return, and the device reads that as a point in space. In the top left, you have photogrammetry. And photogrammetry is the one we're going to focus on here. It's also known as structure from motion. And what this is, it's effectively using a camera to take multiple images of an object from lots of different perspectives and then putting that into a special computer program that then triangulates from the things that it sees in each image, where it sees a common feature, where it sees common data, it will actually produce triangulation, a point in space, and then reconstruct that object in 3D spaces. So that's broadly, very generally how they work. For us, photogrammetry is a really accessible and useful technology. because it allows us to use cameras which are non-invasive. For instance, you just take a photo of an object, you're not beaming lasers off it or anything like that. Is a very accessible technology. And what it does here, it literally uses camera images to triangulate that point in space, as I just said. So there's a little diagram that shows you, the fundamental principle of it. The main benefit of photogrammetry really is in capturing the surface textures of an object. So while infrared scanning or laser scanning might be very, very good at recording and documenting the actual physical shape of an object, they're not so good at recording the color information on the surface of an object. And that's really photogrammetry's strong point. Certainly from a perspective of documenting historical objects, cultural, objects of cultural significance, you want to see that detail. You want to see the history of the object represented in the 3D object that you produce from it. This is a very costly, or it can be a very complicated and very costly methodology, simply in time. More than anything else, it takes time to set up a camera. It takes time to set up an object in a studio environment. Then you have to capture each image, and it could run into hundreds, possibly even thousands of images per model. So there are a lot of variables. So the service that we have created tries to cut down as much as we can the variables in the capture process. And we do that by employing a motion capture rig. We call it a robot for shorthand, and it sounds far more sexy if we call it a robot. So I'm going to call it a robot from now on. And this is the robot in action during the tests. You won't be able to hear this, I don't think, but it's making a very nice computer whine, motors going. And on here is a camera that is taking images, and the rig controls not just the movement of the camera, but it also controls the movement of the turntable. And we can program it to run through lots of different positions, and it just gets on with it. And we can document thousands of positions in this way and just let the machine do its thing. Once it's captured the top side of a model of an object, then we can actually turn that object upside down if possible, and then capture the underside, and from that we can then produce full 3D models. So this was the very first test that we did back before we even purchased the rig. We actually went on site to Denmark, where the manufacturers are, and we tested that. This is one of Paul's wife's ornaments. I think it's a pomegranate. I may not be.
Yeah, it's a pomegranate. Yeah, even chipped. You can see the chip as well.
Fantastic. So this kind of led us to the conclusion that the rig can do what we think it needs to. So since then, we've been working out how to turn this into a service that's affordable, that's reasonable to deploy, and we've been testing over the last year, things like teapots. Off the back of the conversation that we originally had at the Museums and Heritage Show in 2022. Shiny materials are very, very hard to capture in generally all kinds of the 3D methodologies available. And we worked on a cross-polarization process to bring that object into 3D space. To capture that, we had to cut out the glare and everything else. So that's a technique, a workflow that we've been developing. This is a bobblehead model of I'm not entirely sure what he is, computer video game character, I think, that somebody had in the studio. And obviously this is a teapot, another teapot, but a black teapot with lots of things on it. Made it really, really, really easy, really, really nice to actually digitize. And you can see here the surface textures have been recorded very, very nicely. Okay. So at this point in the process, I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and share something else instead. And this is a walkthrough video. And what I'm going to do now is talk you through how the Arago works, how photogrammetry works, and how we get the results at the end. Once I've done that, I'll talk about the service that we're providing, how the service works, and then I'll hand over to Spencer, who can talk about the next stage on the creative experience that you can get, that you can do with the objects once you have them. So let's play the video. So the first element effectively is a Rago working in our test environment. As you can see, it's digitizing a large model of a land speed record car. You can see it moving around. So it's now tracking through about 300 positions in space. There's the software interface. As you can see, it's running through. There's a countdown on how much time is left. So we have a really good sense of how long each capture is going to take place. So we can extrapolate from that how long it's going to take us to do one object, to capture one object. It means we can then think about how many objects per day, how many setups in the studio do we need, how often we need to change the lights, and all those sorts of things. So it enables us to increase the efficiency of that process. And that's really what the Arago provides for us. As you can see, there's lots of things that we can control in here. We can control how close the camera gets. We can introduce safety margins. We can control the speed of the turntable, so we can slow it down or speed it up if necessary. We can introduce delays in the camera shutter, just to make sure that there's enough time between each shot. So there's lots of different things that we can do depending on the object and the particulars of the object, to ensure that it's always going to be safe and not put in danger through this process. Okay, so what we're going to do next is move on and have a look at what happens after the photos have been taken. Because what we would do now, we'd take the images from the finished capture, we'd process them in something like Lightroom or DxO Optics, and we would just sharpen up those images and get them ready to be put into reality capture. So this is the next stage. Reality capture is a photogrammetry software, and here is the interface. What you can see here is an image that we've taken. This is a camshaft cover from a BRM Formula One car from the 1960s. As you can see, we've got it on our turntable with a target on it. That allows us to understand the metrics of the object placed on there. We can assign and get reality capture to detect those markers. And as you can see, as we cycle through each image here, on the right hand side, you can see where we've turned it over. We've changed the background of the turntable just to give reality capture some more help as to understand that we actually have turned the object over. So it understands that this is now in a different space. And reality capture looks at all the photographs, looks at all the points of interest in each image, and then tries to recreate what the Arago has captured in that 3D space, which is what you can see here. So each one of these little white dots is a camera position. So you can see revolving through it, both sides. And reality capture has actually assessed that and said, oh, okay, this is one side, here's another, and put them together. Just in further detail, there you go. Just increase the size of the camera points just so you can see them a little bit more clearly. There you go. And you can see there we have a few hundred images of the camshaft cover. So if we zoom in a little bit, what we shall see next is actually what reality capture has analyzed and created. And it looks rather ghostly because you can see all the way through it. But what you have here is a data point for each element, each tie point within the 3D cloud that it's recognized. It's put them together, and there are nearly 7 million triangulations from this. So it's millions and millions of points that then create millions and millions of triangles. And from there, we create what's known as a mesh. And this is the mesh for the camshaft cover. As you can see, the mesh with its 6.8 million triangles has documented all of the surface detail on the camshaft cover, some things that might even be invisible to the naked eye. So you can see all the slight defects in the casting, you can see the smut and the oil burnt on it, sort of crusting the surface. And if you flip it over, you can see the BRM brand logo, and you can see the serial number, and you can see the screw holes and everything else. And this is where photogrammetry really comes into its own, is that when we actually map that surface texture on there, you can really see the detail. So we zoom in, you can see all of that crustiness, all the wear and tear, all that detail, and we can flip it over, which hopefully the video is about to do, and you'll be able to see the underside has been reconstructed as well. There we go. So you can see underneath there, it's a pretty good like for like of that photograph. So you can see all the detail, all the crustiness and everything else on that model. So that's a very highly detailed model. To get it to work in a computer environment, we need to reduce the file size. This can run into many hundreds of megabytes with the amount of points that it's got. What we have to do really is to simplify that. And there's some ways to do that. You can automate it with an algorithm. You can do it by hand even if you really, really want to. In this case, we've used reality capture to simplify the model. And if we have a look at this new point cloud, you can see it's even more ghostly than before. And you probably can't even really see it from your view here. So we reduced it from millions of points down to 50,000. But the mesh it produces is still very, very good. You can see the triangles now. In the previous high-res version, you couldn't. But this is now optimized for use in a creative environment. But to keep all the detail that's in the original high-res, we perform a little trick with a thing called a normals map. There are other kind of maps available as well that you can create even more textures and things on. But we use a normal map, which is basically a black and white map of the surface texture that is then put in between the mesh and the textures to give back those textures, those richly detailed textures. There's the normal map. Ignore the color. It is actually black and white. It's just there for just to highlight where it's actually having an effect. And if we look at this normals map, you can see all that detail is back. So that's the trick that we perform. There's lots of other things you can do. You can use displacement maps for things like the highlights. There's roughness maps if you want to make part of the material and it would be rough or and different from the rest of the object. So if you've got shininess and roughness together, you can actually map all of those physical properties of the texture across using techniques like this. If we put the texture back on now over our low res version, you can see all those textures are there. So by using these kinds of techniques, we can actually optimize the models down to something that Spencer's company, ATS, can use in the 3D environments that they create to make sure that they're not using all of those heavy resources that computers need to generate those environments. The lighter we make it, the easier it is to actually use them in those 3D environments that are being created. This is the final model on Sketchfab. Sketchfab is an online site for displaying 3D models, and you can download them. You can sell models on there. Lots of cultural heritage organizations have a presence on Sketchfab. So you can actually use this and output them to the web for people to view, and you can then use them in things like websites and so on. So that is the walkthrough of the process. I haven't gone into too much detail because we don't have a huge amount of time. So I'm going to flip back to the presentation. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how our service is now delivered. If you've got any questions, if you want to ask me any more in-depth questions about the 3D capture, I'm happy to do that. You should be able to have our email addresses and everything else and get in touch with us if you want to talk after the presentation, after the webinar. But if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in chat. I'll try and answer them as best I can with the time that we have. So working on how the service worked. So we work with Genus. So we work with Genus to work on the processes and workflow that we think are going to deliver the service in the most efficient manner. So we actually offer two flavors at the moment. We offer a service where customers can bring their objects to the Genus facility in Nuneaton, or we can put it on Paul's van, which is the key ingredient here. and drive the Arago and spend time at the customer's premises and capture those objects in situ. That's really important because we realise with a lot of cultural collections, it's very, very hard to make them move, especially from insurance perspective and everything else. And actually, if they're in the environments in which they normally live, it makes our life a lot easier for the curators or the owners to actually make these things happen. So we can capture with the Arago a range of object sizes, so anything from size of a matchbox all the way up to a human being. So costumes on mannequins, furniture, those sorts of things, anything that can sit within sort of a 1.5 2 meter cubed environment. So and the turntable can handle, I think it's 88 kilograms. So it can handle quite heavy objects. So if we're at the customer's site, we will introduce a per object cost. So we'll work out how long we think it's going to take to capture the object and then process it afterwards. So we work out, depending on how many objects a customer might have, that determines, once we've done our investigations, how much that job will cost on a per object basis. As you can see, the cost includes all the capture, all the post-processing, the model creation, and then the delivery of the data at the end, whether that's to the customer directly or then on to ATS for use in whatever comes next. The only additional costs to that per object price that we have to factor in is transport of the equipment to and from the customer site. So taking into account things like, I don't know, the ULEZ charge or the congestion charge and anything like that, but also then any travel and accommodation for the capture team. So it depends how far away from the customer and how long the capture process is going to take. That will determine those variable costs. If the capture takes place at the Genus studios in Nuneaton, things become a little simpler. And we base our costs basically on the same sort of costing. So it's per object cost based on how long each object is going to take to capture and then process. But then obviously we don't have costs transporting or accommodation of the capture team. So the cost to the customer has to consider here is their own transportation of their own objects to and from Genus's facility in Nuneaton. Okay, I think that is the end of my bit, Spencer. So I think I'm going to hand over to you now. I'm going to have a look through the questions that we might have received, and I'll catch up with you all at the end.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Martin. I have to say I was reading up on some of the pre-questions as well from people coming along. I think we covered quite a bit, but if we can do we'll do some FAQs afterwards, I think, because they're common questions coming out. But can we do a quick fire answer on some of these questions, Martin? Would be great.
Yeah.
So what's the capture device camera you're using? Is this, proprietary? What is it?
So the capture device we're using is not proprietary. We are using two high-end, well, say two. We use them in tandem in quite a few of our workflows. We use Nikon DSLRs 850, so they're about 50 megapixel cameras, and that's a useful trade-off in terms of speed. The cameras are high quality enough, the sensors are high quality enough to do broadly everything that I think that we need to do. Back at TPM, we were using phase 1 cameras, which are 100 megapixels plus, and that was great for capturing surface detail, but it increased processing time by quite a lot, and because you're throwing massive files into the software. So a really, really high spec DSLR is what we use. Very, very high spec lenses. So yeah.
Pretty much, it's kind of off the shelf, but it's just high end stuff now. So we're not
absolutely
specialist equipment. Yeah. So this again helps with the business model for it really, and making it far more accessible, I think now. Okay, what is difficult to capture, and is photogrammetry better than IR scanning?
Yeah, I alluded to the fact that shiny objects were really, really difficult. The Historic Environment Scotland did a great blog a few years ago that I read avidly for cross-polarization, and that is the technique that we use to try and overcome some of the difficulties with shiny objects. The one problem we have is when objects are featureless. So for instance, the model of the Bluebird land speed car that was in that Arago video, that was horrendous because there's no detail on it really. So things like that, there are mitigations that you can do, techniques that you can employ by spraying the object and that sort of thing. But generally, museums don't like their objects being sprayed. So those kind of objects are still a significant difficulty for us. But they are for any kind of capture technology, really. So anything shiny is going to struggle, whether you're throwing a laser at it or an infrared projection or anything like that. So none of the techniques are perfect. And I think when you think about capture techniques, you know, it's not a case of things being better, it's about things being more appropriate for the certain kind of objects that they're capturing. And actually what we're finding as we've been working on this and developing workflows, the ideal workflow really for quite a lot of things is probably a bit of a hybrid approach. So for objects that we can put on the turntable, by and large, we you know, we've worked out good ways to capture them. But if we were doing something like a car, for instance, a larger object that wouldn't fit with the Arago, we might capture it with photogrammetry to make sure that we've got all the textures. But actually, we might produce the mesh by using, you know, a handheld scanner that's doing structured light or something like that. So they're all complementary in their own way. So you know, depending on what the challenge is, we'll choose the appropriate solution. So I think that probably answers that question. It probably also answers the other question on size limitations and you know, and things, and effects on costs. Effects on costs is a different one in that you know, the more complex an object is, the harder it is to scan, the more time it takes, not only to capture but also to process. So if you've got a complicated object or a large object or a large space to digitize, then you know, things are going to increase in in cost. Okay.
So
What
on
else
that
have we got?
one,
Yeah.
well, on that one, actually going in with the cost, because that was a thing. I remember we spoke a couple of years ago, and you said, "Oh yes, I did the ashes."
Yeah.
Tiny object.
Yeah.
I think you told me it took you weeks to scan and actually edit, which
Yeah.
a museum or anyone with a collection, that's just not economically viable to say
It's
even
not.
100 objects scanned, because the cost is just prohibitive.
Absolutely. You know, when I was at Postal Museum, in fact, what I'm doing now, let's just share that object with you. You can probably see all my screen now. So this is the ashes object. So this was from Lord's Cricket Ground, and we digitized this back in 2019 with phase 1 camera. So you can see that the sort of detail you're getting here is incredible. So this is the original ashes urn. Presumably you can all see this, yeah? That, with the cameras that we were using, with the processes we're using, it took 2 days to capture and was about 5,000 photographs. And we were doing it manually. So this is where the Arago comes in decreasing the time of capture, automating as much of the process as we could actually do. So it took 2 days to capture, but weeks and weeks to optimize that model and get it working, because as you can see, it's shiny. And this is what I mean about the sort of mapping of the textures. So you can see that the urn itself is shiny, but the label isn't. You know, so you can really see the details in there.
So based on that, the ratio now that we've been doing some testings over now, that took you 2 days capture, and let's just say 15 days. What are you, where are we sitting now on the test that we've done? What's that ratio now?
Yeah, so the ratio now is we could probably do that in, we wouldn't need to take as many photographs as we did. That's one of the learning things that we've done. But with the Arago automating a lot of that capture, we can run that down. So if we're doing sort of 5,000, we could do that in a couple of hours, really, this particular model. But actually, this is a full-on model, you know, process. This is a really, really detailed process for different kinds of objects, for something that we don't have to, you know, overcome some of the barriers that this object presented. We can get it down to minutes. We can do 300 photographs in what, 10-15 minutes. You know, that's the radical change that the Arago can do. The processing, again, it's very hard to quantify because it depends on the complexity of the objects themselves. But, you know, we're learning efficiencies all the time with that. We're automating where we can, but also, you know, some of that is very, very manual. So those those processes still can take days.
Yeah. Well, we've got quite a good collection that we're going to start testing on next week. And I think what we'll do is share with the group and people who have been on the attention, here's an object. These are the tricky bits about it. This is how long it took to scan, and this is the edit. And there'll be different materials and different size objects that I think many people could probably relate to their collection. So I think we're going to have a much better idea. But to say it's drastically reduced the time taken to do all of that is an understatement. I think just the technology in a couple of years is crazy, which is
here
and why we're quite excited about it.
It's developing all the time. I mean, there's been loads of talk about AI and all the things that can provide. There's new visualization techniques that machine learning is providing, things like neural radiance fields that automate a lot of the sort of 3D visualization that's going on, and that's developing all the time. So our using the Arago can help increase the capture time, but there's also lots of other help coming in to automate and create experiences. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be doing this.
Super. Well, I'm wary of time. I'm not going to go too far into so my bit about the creative. So our part in the partnership is the creative storytelling. Ultimately, I see huge potential this for archives, for digital archives and the quality and everything. But once you've got it and you put it into your archives, what we're looking at is, how is that a visitor experience? How does an audience, a general audience, engage with that collection online or on site? And it depends on the formats we're looking at. I think the thing for us, when I look at it and say, once you've captured this, the multiple channels that you can then use this 3D object in is huge. You get huge return on investment, I think, because you spend the one time on the capture and then you can use it in all these different channels. So I'll touch on a couple of those and just some of the kind of creative ideas that we've been kind of spinning around with some clients and potential clients who have got collections, small stories. But the first thing is just going back to Martin's point at the beginning, was looking at, people engaging with collections now online or digital as a whole. But you can see in museums especially, they have an actual defined separate digital audience that are, whether they're remote or they're in schools or they're in, other countries that they're never going to visit your physical museum. It's a growing audience for online, and how you tell those stories is really important, because during COVID, when we all closed our doors and we couldn't have visitors in, the reaction was to put everything online, and it was great. It's like there was a big push to digitizing lots of stuff. What can we put online? But essentially, that was almost like a repository of content, but it wasn't an experience. And I think that's where we've learned a lot over the last few years, is how can we create experiences with this digital content? And that brings those kind of stories alive and the collection and puts them into context. So that's kind of where we've come from. So I'm just going to show some brief examples. When I talk about the overall channels that you can push this out on, like I said, we've got the archives, so you have your own kind of collection management system that will be in there, but then you've got Sketchfab, which essentially is almost an archive, a public available one, but essentially it is just models on their own. They're not telling a story necessarily. There are some features in there that you can hotspot and animate, but essentially you'll be popping in and seeing these small parts of Sketchfab. I'm sure you're pretty much all of you familiar with that. So public access there. Websites, online digital tours and experiences. So we've been doing temporaries or permanents, where people now spend some time on a site. They want to be entertained. If they're not there to find out information about visiting your site, the next thing is they want to be told and have those stories. And essentially, if you just had a scrapbook of content on there, it's not as entertaining, as engaging as having a narrative in there, as we all know as well. Is that interpretation, storytelling is key to engaging those audiences. So online digital tours, these are 3D. So of course, there's the opportunity for augmented reality, Google goggles, even VR. We know that, Martin said about Assassin's Creed, there was an object in, Hampshire Cultural Trust have an object, and that's featured in the game. So you're having this authenticity of an object that is the actual object, but in a virtual world, not just someone who's modeled up what it looks like and measured it. it is the actual object through photogrammetry. That's what we're kind of extremely passionate about, I think, as well. The authenticity that this brings is fascinating. Virtual handling collections, that's another area that we can look at. So we did a project, for example, with Bletchley Park, and we recreated an Enigma machine as a simulator. So it's a simulator piece. So we 3D modeled the Enigma machine. They're very expensive to take those around school. You might have some heavy-handed children there. So how can we protect this very valuable object? So we created a simulator, but that was a 3D model that we created from scratch. Now that we've got this tech, if I went back and did that project again, what we would probably do is 3D photogrammetry and capture that model in 3D. And then we can edit that model and animate and use it as a simulator. It just adds that extra layer of authenticity, and it's the actual real thing, but in its digital twin form, essentially. But then we can animate it and add the usability of it and how it's used in context. So that's quite exciting. So virtual handling of objects is kind of a phrase that we're kind of playing around with. You can turn these, put them into games objects. But on site, we could also have objects that you may be in your collection and aren't actually on display. They could be on a digital touchscreens. They could be on any sorts of AV, actually on site. So once you've got those, you can turn them, you can put them into videos, as simple as that, put them into animated videos and films as well. And there's other areas which we haven't touched into, which is probably a whole other webinar, which is around 3D printing. And I guess once you've captured something, you could potentially have buy that product replica, print at home or print in store. But we're not going to delve into that too much, but I'm sure that's something that might be of interest later. So I'm just going to share a couple of examples, if that's all right with you guys, on some of these creators. So this is Sketchfab. So you've got your individual models on here. They can be displayed, but you can also download them and pay for them. And that's another area that, again, we haven't touched on a lot, us personally, but monetization of being able to sell your models. So if you've got pieces, you could actually then, look at some sort of revenue model where people buy the authentic 3D model of the actual piece and use it in their content for storytelling, on-site interpretation. So we played around with we've mentioned teapots a few times. So this is our first kind of major project. And the brief initially was, it was a conversation at the M&H show, was we'd like to digitize our collection of teapots and put them online. And my initial question was, great, and then how are you going to tell the story about them? And they hadn't thought about that far. They just wanted to digitize the collection and put it online. So we started playing around with how can you put this in context. So we looked at a selection of them, and we wanted to tell the history of tea, or the global history of the tea trade and tea trading. And we broke that down into kind of almost mini chapters. We started talking about, well, what if we break this down into a mini chapter? And what would that look like online using the artifacts that we're going to scan? So instead of just showing the artifact like on Sketchfab here, we started playing around with being able to, almost like a homepage. I think you've seen kind of scrollable stories. It's that kind of feel. But the client was asking about, can we make this again? Can someone wander through these areas and these stories and these environments? But that was actually quite a tricky thing to do. It's very costly at times as well if you're trying to create full 3D environments that allows individuals to free roam. So we started playing with a hybrid idea, and essentially, it's a landing page of a chapter of a story. So we're talking about tea coming to Europe, and as we're scrolling through, you're scrolling through the page, we've got this example scan tea, but this is not one of their collection, I must say right at this point. But what we've done is talking about, this teapot traveled on a galleon, it came across. So this is just a proof of concept to show that we've put in a 3D environment that, again, we could buy the galleon, or we can build the galleon, we can build the environment around it. It also has, which we can't show you or you can't hear, is sound effects as you're moving through the spaces as well. And what we can do is we can bring up various copies of, various pieces of text and interpretation tools. You can bring up an embedded Sketchfab window, which when I'm here, I can actually scroll around live and zoom in. I can also, it's got the option for the Google goggles, so VR. You can see the different layers and you can start putting various content in there. We've played around with adding video, mini video vignettes. And as we scroll around, the story is just flowing around to put this in context that, yes, we have this teapot, but this is the story it came on. And again, having another potential pop-up with some extra bits and some text. Not stunningly innovative. I'm going to say, you might look and say, well, yeah, that's a 3D space and we're moving around it. But what we're coming back to is the audience and the innovation is really in, and I bring this back to an example around cinemas where we go and sit in a big dark room and watch a film on the screen quality is probably better than it was 50 years ago, and the sound quality is better than 50 years ago. The chairs are probably comfier as well, and the snacks might be better. But essentially, you are watching a film that's a fantastic story, but the technology used in the creation of the CGI, or it's the way in which they've used cameras and drones and all that magic inside, but essentially we're still viewing it in a kind of essentially a 2D, sometimes 3D environment in a traditional way. So the innovation is more about the production, and I think that's where we're coming from on this partnership, and the opportunities it's about the innovation in the collection, in the creation of the content, rather than always the presentation. So we won't always go to a VR experience. We're looking at, well, this is perfect for schools where people can come in. It's very easy to access on a big screen. Again, those chapter kind of ideas, you can do it into 2D and 3D. So we're kind of using a blend. The Economist have got some lovely examples here. And this is kind of where we're talking about the Ordnance Survey. And as you're scrolling through, it's very nice way in presentation. And I imagine many of you have seen this kind of approach, but it's kind of maximizing this and using the 3D objects that they've captured, those authentic 3D objects in that space. And I'll give you another, it doesn't have to just be the real view. This was another thing that inspired us a little, which is, this is a computer game. We've created a 3D space, a 3D environment, and then it's been textualized into an illustration style. So it's feeling very, 1940s, we're in World War II here. And as I'm scrolling through, I'm moving through the space, and then these various pop-ups come up and I can access content. And the sound, you can't hear, I'm afraid, but the sound is changing as we're going through. So we're putting in this lovely binaural sound over the top. We've got a plane flying over the top, and then we're hearing cracks of bullets, and then you're following the bullet through. So again, this lovely environment, it feels like I'm controlling this whole thing, which I kind of am, but I'm on a linear path. So again, it's using some technology that's already out there, but bringing it all together to make it feel like a really lovely linear narrative that you can follow through and you're partly in control of. So there's plenty going on as far as how we can present this: digital websites, touch screens, AR, VR, that, really it's limitless, but essentially it's getting those great content early on. And that's what we've done with Martin and Paul and the team, is capturing those great objects straight up. So I'm just checking any more questions. I haven't got any more from the crowd at the moment. But I think we've probably answered quite a lot here. I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to give a few more extra bits on the business case and some old questions, I believe. So yeah, I'll hand over to Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Spencer, and again Martin as well. That's a really good summary of how it all works. I think it's just a sort of summarising the business case. The whole capture process has been brought down to 10-20 minutes now, from typically 2 days. The expertise that Digitization IO bring into that mix as well to get the best quality images, and then the ability to tell a story through ATS at the end is what it's all about. And I think what we're finding with live experience is that the vast majority of our customers prefer us to come and capture on site. Obvious reasons for that is your collections are precious. You don't want them moved. They can come to Nuneaton. There's economic advantages sometimes for doing that. But not only is this our Go system significantly reducing the time, it allows us to come to you and have your conservators on site monitoring things so that everything is handled as you wish it to be. So that's, I think, the key element of it all. So we can come on site, we handle the transportation, we bring the Argo is completely portable, we bring everything with it, the lights, the diffusers, the backdrops. And what we're getting is your collections that are either in a glass case at the moment and you don't want anybody to touch them. Suddenly we're getting the 3D object, so you can make a much more usable experience, as Spencer's pointed out. Or more than likely, these are things that aren't even on display to the public at the moment. They're hidden in a warehouse somewhere. So suddenly all those can come out into the world, and people, you can show your collection, a lot more of your collection. But again, the original is safe and protected. The other advantages of coming on site as well are the handling, the insurance. You know, we can cover insurance when they're on our site, bespoke insurance, but you'll be covered by your own insurance on site. And we've also found that object choice comes up as well. People decide they want these 10, 20 items capturing when we come down for a few days. But actually they say, well, now you're here, could you do this one and this one instead, or don't do these? So it's a lot more flexibility in what we actually capture too. And it's the speed, you know, the speed of making these decisions, and the risk elements have been taken away, so management can sign off on these things a lot better. And it's the quality. The photogrammetry is one of the methods of 3D capture, but it's from a heritage world, is that visual representation of the objects. People want to see what it looks like and get a good idea of it. Photogrammetry can achieve that for you. And so that sort of is why we think this whole opportunity is really exciting, and why with the new technology of the Arago and what ATS can present to you, we've got a winning formula. So I think that sort of sums it all up really for everybody. So if there are any more questions, we can answer those, or we can go on to the poll results as well.
Super. So we're just going to pop up a poll for now. If Karina can access that, that should come up on your screens, everybody. They're just 3 basic questions there. And if you wouldn't mind answering those, it just gives us a sense of kind of what the appetite is for what we're doing. And predominantly on the capture, maybe not the presentation. It might be more about the capture, but it'd be good to get your feedback on that. So if you wouldn't mind answering those, that'd be fantastic. And Karina's going to tell me when everyone's done it. Okay. So as you might be considering your answers there, just to do a big thanks to Martin and Paul and Jeff as well back at Digitise.io. We're really excited by this partnership, and I think what we're hearing a lot of interest since the M&H show when we demonstrated it, and we've been asked to go in and do sample collections. So can we come in and scan? We really want to see what it's like for our collection, not only for the quality of the scan and how difficult the objects might be, but just the overall process of what that looks like and what staff requirements are needed. We have a methodology, a plan of how we turn up on site, identify the space, help you identify the best objects to try to start with. Definitely find some challenging ones so that we can prove what works and what doesn't.
Causes me headaches, but I like it.
Well, we've got to be challenged, right? So, and we had some fantastic examples of the M&H show. Someone wanted to capture fungi, and it was like, wow, okay, I didn't expect that to come up. But so yeah, there's lots of objects and styles and different approaches that they're looking at. So yeah, we're very keen to come in and do a trial. If you wanted to do a small sample collection, then I think that's sound like a really good next step. We're also going to share the experience that we've got with our first client, and looking at those captures and the lessons we've learned and the quality of objects. So hopefully there'll be a follow-up, and we'll see there. So okie doke, we have now got our poll results. I can see those there, so thanks very much. That was really good. So actually wow, yeah, we're looking at, there's quite a lot of you who are looking at either are or potentially we're looking over 75% of you are looking to digitize, which is fantastic. Yeah, and would you like a large assessment? Well, and an appetite to find out more. So hopefully we've done a good job, and yeah, thank you very much for those answers. It's really helpful, and hopefully forms us to be able to do some good webinars next. So great. If there's no more questions, which I don't think they are, we've answered quite a lot. we'll follow up with FAQs, and this will be recorded. So if you've got any wider team who might be interested in it, you can share that with them. I just want to thank again Martin, Paul, and Jeff for all the prep and stuff, and Karina and Hayley in the background who've also been helping with the administration of everything.
And thanks to you, Spencer, as well.
Yeah, you're hosting. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
thanks so much.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for joining us. 12 o'clock, bang on, 1 hour. That's pretty good timing. So good stuff. Have a good day, everybody. And yeah, be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.